Hello and welcome to the second PAL Network monthly spotlight, where we bring to you the innovations and stories from PAL Network members working towards improving children's foundational learning. Our guest today is Dr. Modupe Adefeso Olateju, the Managing Director of the Education Partnership Center, Nigeria's pioneering education partnership organization. The TEP Center houses Learn Nigeria, the country's foremost citizen-led assessment. Mo is a recognized policy expert specializing in public-private partnerships in education. And most recently, she was awarded as the 2020-21 Asia Global Fellow. And with that, we welcome our esteemed guest. Greetings, Mo. How are you?
Thank you so much, Raj. It's great to be here. Thank you for the invitation to be part of this.
Great. So our audience would like to know that in your own words, what has been the motivation and journey of Learn Nigeria and TEP Center?
So TEP Center is an organization. TEP actually stands for the Education Partnership. So TEP Center is the Education Partnership Center. And it is an organization that was birthed out of a need to address the gaps that we were seeing in how the public and the private sectors were working in sub-Saharan Africa. And so for us, we had empirically ascertained that there were benefits to be derived for children if the public and the private sectors collaborated better and worked smarter together and worked in partnership. We didn't see a lot of this partnership on the continent, however, and so it was important for us to get this done. And TEP Center was the way by which we thought it would be good for us to establish this sort of mechanism. Since then, TEP Center has gone on to provide advisory services to organizations, development organizations, for example, to state and federal governments, national governments, as well as to different types of civil society organizations and indeed the private sector as well. So we really work with several different types of stakeholders, all in a bid to move the needle when it comes to education, and particularly education for children that are marginalized. As an organization, we value ourselves on responsiveness, and one of our values is actually being responsive. And so this was what really began the journey, I think, of Learn Nigeria. So a team of people then came together to learn from the work that had been done with Pratham and the ASA Center in India, and also to learn from the wonderful work that had been done by ASA Pakistan. And we also came into very close contact with an organization called UWEZO. It was called UWEZO at the time, East Africa, comprising Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania. We were graciously admitted, into what was then the Juba family, but which ultimately became the PAL Network, which is the People's Action for Learning Network. But at the time was the Juba Network. And as the baby of the family at the time, it was just important for us to be able to soak up the knowledge, the learnings, the experiences of our colleagues in other countries who had also implemented what we came to then know was the citizen-led approach. And the citizen-led approach that Learn Nigeria adopts is no different from that which is adopted in other countries across the PAL network. For us, citizen agency is at the heart of reform. And if we are going to make a system accountable to itself, one of the first variables that we must consider is how much data is available, how much evidence is available. And that evidence becomes the lever for advocacy efforts, for different types of programs, different types of action initiatives that can be taken across the country. And so for us, it's really been a journey of data and the power of evidence coupled with citizens that are engaged and are empowered with that evidence. And we have begun to see what the transformative power of that can look like within our context in Nigeria.
We have the statistics, which tells us that 55% of the children in grade 9 aren't able to do grade 2 level foundational competency activities. But what is one experience that resonated with you when you were doing Learn Nigeria that you still remember from the field? One picture, one one conversation, what really stuck with you that gave you motivation of going back and doing it again? Because it's a hard job. It's a very tough ask. Going back, collecting the information, it's tough. So what gave you that motivation? That story that gave you motivation?
So I think it's a great question, Raj. And I mean, I can speak for myself, and I can also speak for some members of the team who shared this experience, with me. There are perhaps two experiences that I should highlight. I think the first was the experience of us going into a very rural community. And of course, because Learn Nigeria is implemented in partnership, with several different government agencies, parastatals, as we refer to them here in Nigeria, and departments. And so I remember that particular enumeration area was one that we visited with some representatives who work in the area of curriculum development for the government. And, we got into this particular community in a very, very urbanized city, but it was a rural community. And it took us a long time to identify the households, to even identify the enumeration area because it was very sparse. And by the time the residents of that area started to emerge, we wondered whether we were still in the year 2017 going into 2018 because, the women were only partially dressed, the children were not dressed at all. There were children in that community whom we sat down to interview. Some of them were 11 years old. I remember there was a 14-year-old boy who said to us, I've never been to school. Am I supposed to be in school? He said this to us in the local language. And that distress I was referring to, you could see that on the faces of the government officials. And of course, by the time we started to assess the children, they were not literate even at the most basic of basic levels. They couldn't even identify the letters. And, I remember one image that stuck with me was one of the curriculum developers sat on a stool in one of the households, and he had his head in his hands and he was shaking his head like this. And I asked him what the matter was, and he said he would never have believed it. He said, I've worked with government for several years. I developed curriculum. I would never have believed that this was possible in this state. The second story is a slightly more joyous one, us going into a particular household. And I remember when we assessed the children, we left a pamphlet for them. And that pamphlet was just when you fold an A4, you get 2 sheets of A5 paper. So pretty small. And it was a pamphlet that had some stories, on it and some pictures, for the children. And I remember one child, took the pamphlet and hugged it very closely, to himself. And we were wondering, why he was so excited about a simple pamphlet. And he said, in halting English, this is my first storybook.
Wow.
And yes, it was actually the first storybook that he had ever owned, only it wasn't even a book. And so I think that when we go into the field to collect this data, the numbers are very important. The statistics are critical. But we come to the realization every time that the statistics represent people. They represent human beings, they represent children. And for every child whose life we don't intervene in, we have a kind of clear picture of where they're headed. And it's not a pleasant future. And so I think this is part of the motivation to continue to do this kind of work, even in very challenging, very dangerous, sometimes very, at risk, communities. It's very important, I think, that this kind of work continues.
Taking our experience from our PAL network countries, what do you suppose other people can learn from our experience? Let's say we take it to them. I mean, learning is always transactional or sharing, knowledge sharing, exchange. So what do you suppose they can learn from us, from our experiences?
I think that there is a lot that the countries can learn from each other and the context can learn from each other. If I were to look at it from the perspective of what Africa can learn, from the Asian experience, and I look, for example, at the 2 first Asian countries in the network, obviously India, the parent country, and then Pakistan. I think there is one very important, very important component that is a critical success factor for the work that is done in those two countries. And that is an engaged, an enlightened, and a socially conscious populace. People who represent communities that are deeply concerned about their people and are willing to throw themselves in at no cost to ensure that they get access, they fight for access to good quality education for their children, and they continue to advocate for the reforms that will make this possible. So having that very enlightened citizenry, I talk about how civic agency is incredible in a country, like India. And of course, we know about the Mahatma Gandhis and some of the foundations, around that. I think there is a lot for Africa to learn, in the context, in this particular context. Having citizens that are conscious, having citizens that are engaged, and citizens that are concerned, and who also have a sense of responsibility to each other. It really does make the work easier, and the nature of the work that we do need not be transactional, but just, based on the civic agency, of the citizens. And I love that. I love that visiting India, I could see that powerfully. I could see that citizens were ready to hold their governments to account, come what may, regardless of the consequences, they would fight, and I think that there is a lot, that one can learn from that.
And what are some examples of citizen agency that you've seen work wonders in the past few years?
The reality of our NSAS protests, for example, in October last year, where young people came out and defied the entire system and protested on the streets. Ultimately, some of them lost their lives due to, again, what they were fighting, which was, the brutality of the forces. We can see that there is an awareness of the need to participate in the process. Now, when it comes to education, we've also begun to see that as well. And in the work that we do in Learn Nigeria, we're seeing more and more how civil society organizations are apprehending the data. They're looking at it and asking themselves critical questions about how did we get there? They're organizing town hall meetings with their political leaders, their local political leaders. They are taking matters into their own hands, starting book clubs and reading clubs of their own accord, on their own accord. And they are participating in the process. But enlightenment is a critical component of this. And enlightenment comes by having information. And this is where the work that Learn Nigeria does is very important. Putting out the information that helps citizens feel empowered enough and emboldened enough to demand the change that they require to be seen in the sector is critical. And I'm very pleased that we have begun to see a lot of this, across the country.
When Learn Nigeria engages with the people to bring this to the fore, how is the reception and how is the adoption by government agencies and other stakeholders? Because as a partnership organization in the private public space, you work with multiple stakeholders. How do they participate in creating this movement?
Well, in the first instance, Learn Nigeria is a partnership. And so Learn Nigeria is not about, the work that we do as one organization. It's really about the work that TEP, TEP does, the Education Partnership does, combined with the efforts of the National Population Commission, the Nigerian Bureau of Statistics, the Nigerian Education Research and Development Council, which is responsible for the national curriculum. Of course, PAL Network is involved in this process, naturally speaking. A civil society organization like SAKEFA also sits on the steering committee, which is the National Civil Society Organization, an umbrella one. There are so many actors that are part of this process. And that in itself is important for change to happen. Because being able to look at a problem from multiple perspectives and come to a consensus is a proven way of moving the needle, of moving forward. And so when, for example, and I'll get a bit granular here, when, for example, we are designing our assessments, we're designing the surveys, we're designing our communication strategy. There are representatives of all of these different types of organizations. There are academics from institutions, higher institutions in Nigeria, representatives from the federal ministry, state ministries of education and the different departments. We are all there together. We're all sitting there. We're all designing together based on the PAL network frameworks. We are all interrogating. We are all adding to the content. When the time comes for us to go into the field to collect data, we are all there. We're all there together, collecting the data together. Everyone there's a roster, there's a timetable. Even the process of validation is a participatory one. And when the dissemination phase comes along, we're all there once again. And I think one of the most heartening moments, for me personally, is during one of the dissemination meetings that we have had, having a representative of an agency that was not involved in this process, critiquing some of the work that we had done. And before we could say a word, the director of another government agency standing up to defend the process and to defend the work with evidence and with proof. For us, these are all markers of change. And the building of these corporate relationships with a shared vision to ensure that rigorously corrected data is available to the public and is made accessible to all, because we're not hiding anything. The data is available on our website. The entire data sets are available on our website for download, and several persons and organizations, download and utilize those data sets. That commitment to transparency is not one that we have seen a lot of in recent, in our recent history as a country. So we're excited about that process, and we believe that that is one way. And this is advice that we also give to organizations that we consult for. We say, look, if you're really thinking seriously about an innovation that needs to scale so that it can benefit children, many, many more children, millions of children across your context in sub-Saharan Africa, you need to have the critical stakeholders at the table when you are designing, not when you are done, when you are designing the process. It has to be a shared process, and you would be shocked at the amount of value that all the stakeholders bring to the table. And this is something that we always advocate for. So definitely, we think that that's one marker of success, absolutely.
Thanks for that. And I'll pick up from this idea of bringing stakeholders right from the design stage. And I think TEP Center is uniquely positioned in that way, because the center is working towards public-private partnerships and through public-private partnerships. And what would you say is the unique experience of bringing the PPP model into or combining it with the CLA model? What is the unique experience you've had to get that going?
I think that it's very important to highlight that even before Learn Nigeria began as a program, 1 full year of advocacy was carried out, totally unfunded. We did this because we really wanted to do it. Advocacy and my colleagues, who supported the co-founding, of this initiative, would attest to this. Advocacy, particularly to the public sector, being able to visit with them, being able to explain what we were trying to do, and being able to secure their buy-in to participate in this process, being able to sign memoranda of understanding, with them, and being able to assure them that this was important to do. Now, that is the route that is not often seen, right? So very often we see the shoot, which is engagement, at all levels of the assessment, advocacy, and action. But the root of it is really understanding the needs of the government, for example, if we're considering government as the partner, understanding their needs and explaining how it is that the solution can begin to address some of those needs and coming to that consensus. I think this is part of our unique experience, and it's one that we talk about quite a lot. We want others to learn how to respect partners. Excuse me. Participatory planning is going to fall flat on its face if there isn't respect. All partners bring something to the table, and we must respect that. And we must be humble enough to draw from what each partner brings to the table. It doesn't matter how advanced the organization, there is always something to learn, from another organization. So this is part, I think, of our unique experience.
Special thanks for the idea that there is always much to learn from everybody. And through that knowledge sharing, learning, one can grow as a family, as a group, as a team, working to improve children's foundational learning. I think that's a fantastic, noble sentiment. As part and within PAL network, we know Learn Nigeria and TEP Center for advocacy, for innovation, for taking the message. Tell us a little bit about the innovations, how it has helped you promote foundational learning of children, and how you have worked towards the remedial programs that solve the issue of foundational learning in your context.
Right, thank you, Raj. I think the question you're asking is how the process of implementing Learn Nigeria has brought us to a place where we're able to deliver the remedial programming.
Yes.
Right. So that in itself has been a journey. As you know, the remedial program, which was initiated by Pratham, which was designed, and conceptualized, and initiated by Pratham, is one which sees us meeting each child at their own level, and so that principle, which for us again is a principle of respect, starting from where the child actually is rather than from where we expect the child to be. That principle of respect is very important to us. So respect for the child as an individual, and as an individual who has capabilities that can be further maximized. For us, beginning with the Learn Nigeria assessments was a fantastic foundation, because being able to show, the aggregate of the data when it comes to learning levels draws spectacular levels of attention to the challenge. But you don't stop at the challenge, do you? You move on to the solution. And I love, how Rukmini Banerjee, the mother of the ship, would say to us, do you want to be the thermometer or do you want to be the medicine? And so more and more we realize that whilst we do the assessments, we feel the pulse of children's learning levels, but then we also have to be prepared to intervene where children have been left behind. And so the assessments were a critical foundation for us. And then we began the process of remediating. And that in itself has been an experimental journey. Many of the countries within the PAL network, especially those in Africa, I think are experimenting with models. The 9 of us who are currently, implementing versions of the remedial program are all experimenting. Some are experimenting with low tech, low levels of technology, digitization. Some are using accelerated learning as their platform. There's so many different approaches that are being taken. And for me, this is the excitement. So in our own context, we are again beginning from where the child actually is in terms of their level. We've collaborated with government, we've collaborated with donor organizations, and we're looking to scale the impact of this work, indeed to scale the rollout of the work, across Nigeria as well. I must say, however, that, if all children were in school and learning well, which is the motto of Pratham, we wouldn't need to remediate that much, would we?
mm,
So even as a network, our mission should be to run ourselves out of business. Our mission,
mm,
when it comes to the action remedial programs, should be to make
mm,
ourselves irrelevant in that space, because all children are in school and they are learning
mm,
well. They are learning
mm,
at their own pace. And this is where educators can begin to learn even more from how the remedial program methodology is adopted, how it is implemented. Because in so doing, there are ways by which we can embed this into our own practice, at school level, at classroom level, so that children do not need to fall behind. Every child that is met at his or her own pace, at his or her own level, need actually not fall behind. And I think that continues, to be our enduring thought, and one that propels us to do more in the system, so that ultimately we can work ourselves out of a remedial
mm,
job. This is our hope, and this is our aspiration.
mm. What is your take on something like ICANN or something that we're doing currently as part of iCare or ICANN Plus, where we are trying to create one common tool to assess numeracy or literacy and language learning of children across multiple different contexts? How do you think we can really take that forward, use that evidence, and make more impact than what we've already done?
Right. So I think, one of the main critiques of the CLE approach is, so how do we compare the data? How do we compare the data from different countries? Bearing in mind that most of the countries are assessing based on their curricula, and curricula
Mm,
differ from country to country context. So the whole idea of having a common assessment, this international assessment, is to address that. And so as a
mm,
network, we have clearly begun with numeracy. We have
mm,
implemented this assessment in several of our countries. And I think that the implementation has been successful. We have taken a lot of learnings on board, which are being factored into the design even of a new assessment, for example, the IKEA, which is going to be the reading component.
mm,
So why is this assessment important? It's important because it gives the Global South something to hold on to when it
mm,
comes to learning assessments. It gives us a
mm,
scale that is
mm,
contextualized for our own environments and for the
mm,
peculiar challenges that we face as countries that are termed developing.
mm,
And the idea of the commonality is
mm,
interesting because, on the one hand, a lot of countries would accept that
mm,
most of the items in the ICANN, for example, assessment are applicable in their own country context, maybe in different ways. But we're teaching concepts that are also taught in school. But then we're going
mm,
a little bit beyond that, aren't we? Into what
mm,
would be nice for children to be able to do. So in a way, we're also pushing the envelope when it comes to curriculum development. When I think about assessment and curriculum, I think of them as two sides of the same coin.
mm,
So you deliver a curriculum, you've got to know, right, whether children are truly learning. So you have to assess, you have to know whether the curriculum has been delivered. One of the things that I like to ask, one of the questions I like to ask is, if a teacher comes into a classroom and delivers a lesson, and the children have not learned, then has the teacher actually taught? And
mm,
this usually causes a bit of an uproar, because some people say, yes, the teacher has taught. Others say, no, the learner has not learned. So
mm,
curriculum and assessment, whether summative or formative, go hand in hand. Now,
mm,
when you start with assessment, you create the opportunity for curriculum to be developed as well, because you
mm,
are showing that if we can test children around these particular concepts, then maybe there is scope for us to teach around these particular concepts as well. And so I
mm,
think that curriculum developers need to also think about paying attention to some of these tools
mm,
that we're developing, because we're
mm,
developing these tools based on the experience that we have collated, over the
mm,
years. And that
mm,
is not, the level of experience of a PAL network is not anyone that you can thumb your nose at. It is solid
mm,
experience of implementing these assessments and working within the context of schools and education systems for several years. So that, I
mm,
think, is one thing. I
mm,
also believe very strongly that the assessments are those which give us an opportunity to begin to think deeply as country context or even subnational context about reporting against SDG 4.1.1. And so when we think about the fact that the global proficiency framework benchmarking exercise has utilized the ICANN tool and it has held up really, really well. It lent credence to the argument that this tool is one that countries can begin to explore in their own context as they think about reporting against global benchmarks for SDG 4.1.1. So I think that there are many opportunities. There are also opportunities to build capacity, to use these assessments to build capacity for developing tools that actually work, learning assessment tools that work. And I know that quite a few organizations have already begun to take notes, from the process that we had to go through, a very rigorous process that we all had to go through to be able to develop the ICANN tool and the rigorous process which is currently in place for developing the reading component of that assessment. I think there's a lot to be learned and shared.
There is a statement that we used to use at Pratham, which was like the tools that we use are simple on the outside, but extremely rigorous on the inside, right? The background work is super rigorous. There's a lot of piloting. The amount of piloting for our tools is probably insane when we compare it to how much other tools maybe have, maybe piloted. So,
no, absolutely, Raj. If I may add to that, I mean, when you want to develop, sometimes we come in contact within our context, with people who've written books for children, written little storybooks for children, and they make the big mistake of bringing them to us to review. Ooh. Because we review for technicality, and we also review for the assessment, factor as well. How are you going to assess whether children have learned what it is that you want them to learn in this book? We're also reviewing deeply, for whether it's suitable for the age and the grade. And so I think that rigor is very important. Being able to infuse that rigor in our context is very, very important. So I do agree with you.
And what is your understanding of the simplicity of our tools, our CLA tools, the ICANN tools? How does it speak to the person doing the enumeration? How does it speak to the parent who is sitting probably beside the child who is being assessed? How have you seen that play out?
At the heart of the CLA approach is the C, the citizen.
Yes.
And as one that has gone through, spent a bit of time in academia, you realize that academic language is a different speak.
Yes.
We're speaking to ourselves a lot of times. That's just my observation. If you really want to speak to the masses, you've got to speak differently. You've got to speak simpler. And that's not because they don't have the cognitive capabilities. It just means that your language is easier to understand and your message is easier to understand. And so more people can understand and appreciate the message. So this is really a key message, of the CLA, is that the C is at the center, the citizen is at the center. If our tools are difficult to use, difficult to understand, difficult to interpret, then how do we build that critical mass of people who can truly understand why these tools are important and understand how to administer them? When it's the same principle, I believe, when you think about some of the biggest social media platforms, the reason why they're so easy to use is because they are so complex on the back end. Somebody has spent a long time and a lot of technical processes have gone on to be able to deliver social media platforms that are clean on the outside or on the surface, easy to use. A lot of people use them with intuition, but when you think about the amount of research and science that has gone into it, you appreciate that the simplicity is not something you take for granted. So it's the same thing, I believe, with our assessments. And I think that continuing to keep them simple whilst being rigorously developed is going to serve not just us well, but everyone who uses those tools. And that way we can democratize access to evidence on children's learning and make it accessible to the people who can make a difference. And those are the citizens, those are the local politicians, those are the policy makers who also appreciate simplicity. We can make it accessible to those that can make that difference in our communities and in the context that we work in.
Thanks for that, Mo. I think our discussions would be incomplete if I don't ask this question. As a policy expert, right, and as an expert in bringing people onto the same table, what do you think we can do to empower our more? So, message to PAL Network and its members be to empower our story even more? And in that respect, how could we take it further to other countries in the global south and connect with our partners in the global north?
I think in the first instance that we're doing a lot already. I really do commend the efforts of all the member countries of the PAL network for continuing to apply themselves to rigor in the work that they do, and thereby holding up the quality standards that PAL network is really adjudging itself by. And so I think in the first instance, it's so, the work that we do in the countries is so heartwarming. It's so thorough, it's so rigorously done. And it's really one that we must commend people for. I also recognize the efforts of the PAL network leaders, especially, at making more visible the work that we do in the international committees that they sit on, in the international spaces, in the conferences that we present at, in our own conference, which we also host and put together, and which has been, quite a success, thus far. So I think that there is a lot that is already happening. And my own admonition would be to do more, to simply continue to do more. Now, we do know, of course, that the COVID-19 pandemic has changed our world. And so we have to keep up. We have to continually ask ourselves, how do we stay relevant? How do we ensure that our service offering to children, to schools, to teachers, to parents, how do we ensure that we continue to deliver what it is that they need? And so this is a charge to us to continue to refresh in terms of our research, to continue to refresh in the way that we engage with data collection processes, in the way that we interpret and make our data available to the public. I think that it's also very important for us to do even more. And I'm so excited, when I hear about some of the digital leaps that we're making, in the network. I think we need to continue to do more. We need to continue to experiment more with digital platforms that help us to deliver these assessments, deliver these remedial programs, and the other things that we do across the network in ways that are easy for people to access without being physically present. So I do believe that there is a lot that can be done, but obviously building on that which has been done already.
Thank you for that, Mo. We're almost at the last stage of this discussion. And I would like to ask you, would you like to share something with the children across Nigeria and children across the PAL network and even other places? What would that one, a quote or a message, what would that one meaningful lesson from you be?
Let me see. I think there might be two messages, but I think for me, more and more, the message that is jumping out at me when I think about the work that we do and when we put citizens, at the heart of it, is a quote by Margaret Mead: "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world, because indeed it's the only thing that ever has." And when we mobilize volunteers, when we go on volunteer drives and ask people to volunteer their time or their services, we must always remind them that the change you're looking for is you. You are the change you've been waiting for, right? And you coming into formation with a critical mass, albeit a small one, can change your world. I think it's really important that we remember to do that. So for me, maybe that would be my own parting thought, actually, to never underestimate the power of what we as citizens can achieve when we're working in partnership with other citizens, you know, within our context and even across our context as well.
Thank you for that message, Mo. So was that a lesson for children or also for us?
I think it's a
Also
lesson for everyone.
Everybody. Or even the child in all of us. So yes, that could also be the case. Thank you, Mo. It was wonderful speaking to you. We learned a lot, and I think the journey is fascinating, and the journey forward as well will be as interesting as it was in the past. Thank you for taking your time. Thank you for being part of the network, sharing your thoughts so candidly, and taking us through the history of TEP Center and Learn Nigeria. Thank you very much.
I do appreciate. Thank you, Raj. It's been wonderful to speak with you, and I wish you all the very best as you continue this fabulous series. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye for now. Bye.